Today, or at least at the time of writing this video, is the 5th of October 2021. This means that exactly 3 years ago I started learning Japanese in 2018. And it's honestly crazy to think that it's been so long, as it genuinely feels like it was just yesterday when I tried out the Japanese course on Duolingo without really thinking too much about it. I think a big reason for why it feels just like yesterday is that I've been learning literally every single day since getting started, which means that the last time I did not learn Japanese was in fact 3 years ago. But at the same time, when I start thinking about some specific events such as reaching the first 2000 cards in my Anki deck or even making the first video on this channel, I really feel like those things happened so long ago that we're already living in a different time by now. I learned Japanese 1 hour a day for 600 days straight was the first video on this channel. It was uploaded in the June of 2020, so it's been pretty much exactly 475 days since then, which is funny because originally it was going to be about the first 500 days of learning Japanese, but the video just took so long to make that I had to remake it as 600, and this video that you're watching right now is supposed to be a follow-up or part 2 to that video. And in that first video, I spoke about how I got into learning Japanese, my previous experience with learning Russian, and everything interesting I've gathered during my journey of trying to learn Japanese. Also, at the end of the video, I tried to demonstrate my at the time level of Japanese as realistically as I could by taking a JLPT entry mock exam, reading and listening to various content on the internet, trying to write a few sentences, and so on. One of the things I did not do, however, was demonstrate any spoken output, and the reason why was because I had never practiced any spoken output in Japanese whatsoever. Essentially, I was only focusing on improving my comprehension, aka understanding of Japanese, which I tried to do through doing lots of Anki and occasionally some immersion whenever I felt like it or had the time. My understanding back then was that early output won't really give me any benefit towards improving my comprehension, and if I had a hard time even comprehending Japanese, then there is barely any value in me trying to output because I wouldn't even be able to tell when whatever I say comes out completely covered in mistakes. On top of that, I did not enjoy the experience I had with learning Russian in school, which focused heavily on early output. I wasn't really in a hurry to output anyway, as I primarily cared just about understanding Japanese at the time, so I didn't really mind avoiding it until I got better at Japanese overall. And still to this day, 475 days later, or nearly 1100 days since getting started with learning Japanese, I really haven't done pretty much any output practice whatsoever except for a few short conversations with natives through the internet. And the most common request I received is to make a video of myself speaking Japanese, so I decided that I'll finally, for the first time in the history of this channel, try to speak some Japanese. London Shishu des. And I gotta say that I have no clue how it's going to go, because even I don't know what I sound like in Japanese, so it's going to be pretty interesting even to myself to see what someone with pretty much no output practice whatsoever is going to sound like when they start speaking for pretty much the first time. And I also really look forward to using this video in the future as a comparison to see if my output has improved at all. So, what have I done since the first video? Well, I made a video about an experiment with listening to a single JoJo episode 50 times. I finally finished or took all the 6000 cards from the Core 2K 6K deck, which I also made a video about, and after that, just like I planned, I started immersing as much as I could. And to kick things off, I tried learning for at least 5 hours a day for the entire summer, aka 3 months. And in those 3 months, combining Anki and immersion, I racked up around 500 hours of learning, which basically means that hours-wise, I almost learned as much Japanese in 3 months as I did in those first 500 days. I also made a lot of update videos on my second channel during those 3 months, so if you're interested in them, I recommend checking them out later. But ultimately, between the first video and this one, I went from building a foundation through doing my spoon-fed reviews from a pre-made deck to focusing on immersion and starting to finally make my own cards through sentence mining. And getting started with sentence mining was kind of hard at first, but once I got used to it, I started making 20 new cards daily in the last month of summer, which is quite a big increase compared to taking only 5 to 6 new cards like I did for most of the Core 2K 6K deck. And that's what I'm still doing to this day. The way I'm learning Japanese right now is that every day I'm mining 20 new words, doing my Anki reviews, and additional immersion whenever I have the time or feel like it. I also started time tracking all my immersion at the beginning of the summer to make sure I was getting enough hours in. But what I discovered though was that time tracking your learning can actually help you keep consistent. It's much easier to set yourself goals such as immersing for at least 1 hour a day and to make sure that you're getting enough time in. I also just find it interesting to have that that data and see those numbers stack up in the long run. It's almost an achievement in of itself to hit 500 hours of immersion, and it's also a really good indicator to see whether or not you're putting in enough hours to make proper progress. Currently, I've tracked around 1,500 hours of learning, 1,000 of which come from Anki and the remaining 500 come from immersion. Unfortunately, I don't really know how many hours I put into learning outside of Anki before that, but I assume it to be at least another 250 or so, which means that I've probably learned Japanese for around 1,750 hours in total. Now, if you just so happen to be anything like an epic gamer such as myself, then 1,750 hours may not seem like a lot, especially if you have something like 10,000 hours in games like League, Counter-Strike, MMOs, and so on. But in my opinion, that's a good thing, because it means that learning a language is by no means impossible. You just need to stack up those hours over the long run. If I manage to spend about 1,750 hours on Japanese in a span of 3 years, it means that on average I learned for a little over 1.5 hours a day. And keep in mind that a large amount of these hours came from immersion, passive listening, and most importantly, doing Anki during downtimes where I otherwise wouldn't have done anything productive. For example, during bathroom breaks, commuting, waiting, and also right after waking up and still being too tired to get out of bed right away. So if you find yourself mindlessly browsing stuff such as social media during those times, you can just replace them with Anki. And if you're going to spend hundreds or thousands of hours on activities such as gaming or watching shows anyway, you can make it a bit more productive by trying to learn Japanese or whatever language at the same time. One of my favorite parts about learning a language is that you can use it as an excuse to revisit old things or do something new that you've been wanting to do forever, but didn't really have a good enough of a reason to prioritize before. So my point is that even though learning a language can take a really long time, you can basically learn one without really losing that much time from your day. Even if you're busy, as long as you stay patient and consistent, you can still get pretty far just with an hour a day. Eventually, you'll also reach the stage where you've built a strong enough foundation that you don't even need to directly learn the language anymore. As long as you keep immersing, you'll just improve naturally as a side effect. When exactly are you going to reach this point really depends on how you're going to use the language in the end, but personally, I feel like I'm not too far from it. Right now, I have a vocabulary of about 8,000 words, which means that usually, depending on the content, it takes around 1 to 3 20-minute episodes of TV shows or anime for me to encounter about 20 words that I don't know, which at least vocabulary-wise should put me to around 97 to 99% comprehension. In the first video, I brought examples of what different levels of comprehension look like, and I actually said that one of the things I was looking forward to was reaching the levels that I'm at right now. And indeed, with this level, I can already enjoy a decent amount of Japanese content without big issues, as long as I can occasionally look up words from a dictionary. So if I wanted to, I could already stop using Anki and keep on learning just through immersion, but I don't want to stop using Anki yet, because I feel like if I kept on going for just a little bit longer, I'd become so much more fluent so much faster. 8,000 words is quite a decent vocabulary, but it's definitely not enough for fluency, which isn't too surprising considering that even JLPT N1 is rumored to contain around 10,000 words. And while I do encounter those sentences where I know all the words but don't really understand the meaning quite often, it's much more common for me to not understand a sentence because I'm missing a few words. So my conclusion is that the most valuable thing I can do to improve my Japanese comprehension right now is just to keep on mining and learning new words, which Anki definitely makes a lot easier. My current plan is to learn 20 new words a day until I hit about 10,000 words, which should only take me around another 100 days or so, as long as I can keep it up, which I mean I hope I can. I'm not really sure what I'm going to do after that yet, but I'll most likely either slow down, take a break, or even stop sentence mining completely. Ideally, I'd aim for something like 12 to 15,000 words, but it will mean that I would have to keep on sentence mining for another year, and that's at the rate of 20 cards a day, which is definitely not easy. I wouldn't really mind it since I know that I will make magnificent progress, but after you use Anki every single day for years, it starts to feel kind of limiting. Not only in terms of time allocation, but I also haven't had a single day where I didn't use my phone or computer in the past 3 years because I have a responsibility of doing my Anki review. videos. It's also rather straining on your hands and eyes if you have to work on the computer pretty much all day as well. On top of that, now that I've become more proficient in Japanese, I kind of want to spend more time just having fun in the language instead of primarily only grinding and doing the labor of sentence mining. I feel like it's relatively easy to learn languages such as English without ever using Anki. I mean, after all, I've done it, but it's much harder to do so for Japanese because of things like kanji. But despite that, one day I would like to graduate from using Anki anyway. I mean, I don't want to be stuck using it forever, especially because occasionally it will be nice to go completely offline without having to worry about getting double the reviews on the following morning. So when I finally hit 10,000 words, I will consider taking a break from adding new cards, but I'll still keep on doing my reviews. And because I'll be spending less time on Anki and on the labor of sentence mining, I'll have more time to focus on other things such as more immersion and perhaps even things such as output practice. My experience with learning English was pretty different compared to learning Japanese. I never really self-learned English outside of school, but I did do a lot of immersion because all the content I liked was in English. I assume that by the time I had learned English for 3 years, I probably already had anywhere from 2,500 to 4,000 hours of English immersion, at least if you combine things such as video games, the internet, and perhaps some TV shows and movies. I'd say that I was rather fluent by the 4th year already, and my output, while not perfect, was definitely good enough to communicate without making too many mistakes other than some of the classics. And I assume that by now, I should have at least 30,000 hours of English immersion, which is rather interesting to think about because while I do think that it's much easier to reach a basic level of fluency in English compared to say Japanese, if you want to be truly fluent and comfortable in any language, you're going to have to get thousands of hours of input, which brings me to another thing I want to talk about. There is something interesting I've noticed in language learning communities, which is that there always seem to be endless discussions between what methods and resources work best. And I find it really interesting how, unlike in most other communities, there is no real general consensus, as everyone seems to have their own opinion. And I suppose, like everyone else, I also have my own opinion, but personally, I feel like I've come to the point where I don't even really care about resources or methods as much anymore. Because in the end, it seems to me that when it comes to reaching fluency, actually spending time with the language is just an unavoidable variable. Even though directly learning vocabulary and some basic grammar is extremely useful in the beginning, even if you learn all the textbook examples in the world, if you haven't trained yourself to parse the raw language itself, coming from natives, in proper context, you'll still be missing the mortar between the stones. And this is especially true when it comes to learning Japanese, and even more so when it comes to Japanese output. Although Japanese is an incredibly flexible language, it also seems to be really sensitive to unnaturalities. While direct translations are almost never a good idea, most languages are much more forgiving of translating your thoughts from one language to another. But since Japanese is so different and unique, you really have to convey your thoughts directly in Japanese without doing any translation work in your head. Most foreign speakers of Japanese, including myself, have no clue how unnatural they actually sound. Not only in terms of sentence structure and word usage, but also even when it comes to things such as having an inconsistent personality. A good example of this is Yakuwarigo, or role language, which is usually used to refer to characters in fiction, but I still wanted to bring it as an example because in Japanese culture there is a very wide variety of language that you can use, and the language that you do use says a lot about you, and if that becomes inconsistent, it's much more noticeable compared to say English. And obviously that's not even touching things such as pronunciation or pitch accent, the latter of which even many fluent foreign speakers of Japanese don't even seem to be aware of or understand the impact of. Many people say that they don't mind having a foreign accent and that they actually kind of like hearing accents such as the Russian accent in English, but pitch accent is nothing like that. It's not really a matter of muscle memory, it's literally just like speaking wrong, which goes against the intuition of the ears of a native speaker. And the only way to understand things like that is just to stack up more and more hours of Japanese input, so you will build an intuition model which instantly tells you what sounds natural and what doesn't without having to do any processing or math. Although for pitch accent you probably need to put in some extra effort into studying it before you even start properly noticing it. But pitch accent is a really endgame concept. I mean, I've done a little bit of work on pitch accent myself, but despite that I still don't really actively notice it yet. And that's exactly why I feel like the only thing that matters in the beginning is that you don't quit and stay consistent. Whether or not Genki is more effective than Duolingo or vice versa really doesn't matter in my opinion, because what you do in the first 100 hours of learning is such a small, insignificant amount of time in the long run, and all the shortcomings will just be covered by immersion anyway. Also, on my first video, I got a lot of comments from people who said that the video was very motivational, which is really epic. But there also were quite a lot of people who said that they felt kind of demotivated after watching it, and I assume that the primary reason for why was because they weren't too happy with the level I had reached after studying for around 600 to 700 hours. I mean, I did say in the video that I didn't reach fluency nor did I hit my goals, which can sound kind of sad, but I knew from the beginning that learning Japanese will take a really long time and the time I had been studying for just wasn't enough. And the same goes for this video. I was actually really happy with the level I had reached at the time, and a part of this was that I didn't set any expectations for myself that I needed to live up to. And managing those expectations is one of the most important things when it comes to long-term goals such as learning a language, which is why I also made a video on it. Although, that's not to say that I'm immune to disappointment, and I also get demotivated sometimes. For example, there have been multiple instances where I realize how surface level my Japanese actually still is, and it becomes questionable whether or not I'll ever reach a level where I'll be able to notice the true depth of certain concepts. Japanese has so many layers that you aren't even able to see until you have thousands of hours of experience as well as cultural and regional knowledge. But if you start worrying about everything at once, it's going to become very overwhelming, and learning Japanese will suddenly start feeling impossible. One of the things especially beginners fear is encountering Japanese words or kanji that have a million meanings that you're supposed to somehow distinguish just from context. But as you get a little bit more advanced, you kinda just start accepting it, and over time you realize that it's actually not that bad. And I assume the same applies to everything else. If you just keep on learning, stay patient, and take one step and one day at a time, you'll eventually reach a level where you'll slowly start to see things that you didn't even know were there before. Even for English, I actually remember revisiting old games and videos and understanding so much more every time I came back. Even if I understood the plot before, I might not have noticed very subtle details that I previously lacked the English ability or cultural knowledge to understand. And I already know the same is going to happen to the Japanese content that I've consumed recently if I ever decide to come back to them. So anyway, if you skipped forward in the video in hopes of seeing what level my Japanese is at right now, you've come to the right place because I think it's finally time to put both my Japanese comprehension as well as output to the test. First, I'll try to demonstrate my comprehension ability by taking a JLPT mock exam as well as describe how much I can understand when watching various different media. And after that, I think it's finally time to actually speak some Japanese, so let's see how it goes.
Kanye West des Dozo Yoroshiku.
Alright, so this is the official JLPT website, and I'm going to try the N2 test because last time I tried the N3 one, and I think while I could get quite a lot of answers correct on N1, I'd still rather save it for the future, for example when I have already over 10,000 words in my vocabulary. I also gotta say that I'm surprisingly nervous. I mean, last time I wasn't, but for some reason this time, maybe it's because of the video, but I don't know. Alright, so let's begin. This is... Oh my god. Okay, I was doing warm-up. This doesn't count. I was testing if the buttons work, but whatever. I'll keep it. Okay. This doesn't make sense. I think it's the second one. Yep. 最後のバスに間に合わなくて困っていた。I feel like I have a pretty vague understanding of these words. Like, I could be wrong, and that's the issue. Okay, never mind. Okay, it was... Oh boy. Reading. Okay, so I got a phone call whilst recording this, so I paused my OBS, but I forgot to unpause it, so this is a reenactment of me choosing the wrong answer. Oh no. So essentially what happened was I somehow tunnel visioned on the third and fourth answer because on first sight they looked correct, so I completely ignored the second one, which in hindsight definitely looks correct. So maybe if I had read it one more time I would have chosen it, but you know, I shall accept it as a mistake. I'll try number 3. Okay. Okay, I think it's number 4. Yay! So I'm going to go with number 2. Epic. Okay, I think it's number 4. Epic. I think it's number 2. Wow, epic gamer. It's funny that listening used to be one of my weak parts, but I feel like listening exercises are much easier now. Ooh, it was. Nice. Okay.
4 家族の健康に悪いから。
That's why. Yay! And I'm done. Alright, so I only got 2 answers wrong, and the first one was kinda unlucky because I didn't really pay attention and chose like a clickbaity version of the correct one, which is rather disappointing, so I suppose you can be the judge on whether or not that was a true mistake or not. However, the second one I suppose was a true mistake because even though in hindsight the correct answer made sense, I was completely focused on the other answers. So based on this exam, my biggest weakness seems to be reading long pieces of text, which makes sense because I really haven't done that in my immersion yet. I didn't really encounter many words that I didn't know, but occasionally the meanings of certain words or grammar points were really vague to me, which made me less confident. Overall, I'm pretty happy with the results, but I'm also kind of feeling like a silver medalist now, in the sense that I almost got all the answers correct if it only weren't for those 2 mistakes, one of which felt like a blunder that shouldn't have happened. But luckily, it doesn't really matter because this is just a mock exam and I'm not learning Japanese for the sake of exams, so regardless, I'm pretty happy with the result and it's a pretty nice memorial, I suppose. Alright, so it's time to move on to testing my ability on random YouTube videos. So let's see, let's find, for example, a Seto Kochi video.
はい、ということで皆さん大変お待たせいたしました。本日のメインイベントでございます。
Today's main event is...
今日の対戦カードはこちら。
Okay. It's kind of hard to make this video now because I can actually understand so much that it feels so redundant to translate pretty much everything I hear. So what I'm going to say instead is that I pretty much understand like 99% of the video. Of course, there are a few words missing here and there, but they don't really stop me from understanding the video as a whole. My comprehension definitely could be better, as pretty often I miss out on small details and some parts feel a bit vague, but overall they don't really stop me from watching the video, so that's pretty nice. Okay, this comment says that the contents were a good reference, but most of all, they're glad that the video was uploaded. So this person waited for this video to be uploaded before watching any other reviews, and they say that it's easy to understand, as always. So essentially, this person would like to see Seto compare his Windows PC to this MacBook to see how they compare in Adobe Premiere. So what I will say is that I think if my Japanese were any worse, then this video would be a lot less comfortable to watch. I think I'm really at the bare minimum level of comfort where I can still watch the video and understand enough, so I wouldn't need to put in a lot of effort into watching it. And a large part of this is probably because this video is still relatively comprehensive, meaning that you can tell what's going on just by looking at the video. But if we move on to a more difficult, less comprehensive, podcasty type video, then while I can understand the video here and there, it's not really as comfortable to watch and I lose interest really quickly, because it takes too much effort to understand what's going on, and despite that, I will probably still miss out on what makes the video interesting. So let's move on to something different. I'm going to watch this episode of anime and then let you know how many words I didn't know. Alright, so I finished it and it ended up being an exceptionally difficult but a really nice episode. So in total I made 18 new Anki cards which contained 21 new words. There probably were around 10 additional words or so that I didn't know, but I decided not to mind them as they seemed extremely rare because they were medical terms and names of diseases that I had never even heard of. So anime is definitely more comprehensive than natural fast-paced Japanese in YouTube videos and so on. And generally, I feel like as long as I have Japanese subtitles that I can occasionally look up words from, anime is completely watchable. Although, I'm definitely not always seeing the true depth of the dialogue yet. So in conclusion, while I definitely wouldn't call myself fluent yet, my comprehension has come a really long way since the first video. And just to put it into perspective, in the JoJo video that I made 10 months ago, or a little over 6 months after the first video, I had over 100 words that I didn't know just in that one episode, and I still had a really hard time with listening. But now, I usually only have around 10 to 25 words that I don't know, even in relatively difficult anime. And when it comes to listening, while I definitely prefer watching stuff with Japanese subtitles because it increases my comprehension, I'm actually rather happy with my listening ability. In fact, I can consume stuff much faster through listening compared to reading, which is probably my biggest weakness in Japanese right now. はい、こんにちは、こんばんは、Livakiviです。これは VR チャットですね。語学学習者、そして YouTuber の間になかなか人気があるゲームですから、ちょっとこの動画で試してみたいと思います。実はですね、このゲームは前にやったことありますけど、他のプレイヤーとほとんど日本語は話さなかったので、今回はなんか初めてですから、ちょっと緊張しています。まあけど、ちょっと勇気を出さないと日本語は上手くならないから、しょうがないですね。じゃあ行きましょう。ジャックさん。 アイスクリームとケーキ、どっちが好きですか？アイスクリームとケーキ、どっちが好きですか？
どっちも好きかな。甘いのは大好きだからね。
私はケーキよりアイスクリームが好きです。
なんか好みあるからな。
アイスクリームケーキ。いいね。アイスクリームケーキいいね。目の前にタバコ吸っている隠れて。ほら。
でも寝てるけどね。
寝てるんだね。タバコ吸ってながら寝てるんだね。
店内で禁煙です。日本人ですか？
日本人ですよ。海外に住んでる。
ああ、なるほど。どこに住んでいますか？
ブラジル。
今日は元気ですか？
眠たい。
私はもうちょっと睡眠不足ですから、ちょっともう疲れています。
出身はどこですか？
So I was going to make a joke about them realizing that I'm not native, but let's be honest, it's really obvious. エストニアです。エストニアでちょっとSo I didn't really know how to naturally say what I was about to say, and my mind went completely blank, so it was a really awkward 10 seconds of silence. 何が言いたかったか忘れました。
こんにちは。
モンスターエナジー。
そうですね。
モンスターエナジー。
ですか？
いや、私は日本人ではない。あなたは？
マザートングランゲージ。日本人です。
なるほど。ちょっと日本語教えてくれませんか？なんか教科書で教えてくれない言葉とか。
教科書で教えてくれない言葉。難しいな。
まあ、
どういうこと知りたいですか？
なんかスラングとか。
インターネットスラングとか。
そう。
草とかそういう感じですかね。ネットスラングか。
そう。
野良ってわかります？
野良って？
はい、野良。そうですね、なんかこうやってうろうろっていうかなんていうか、自由気ままにこういった VR チャットとかをなんかこうやって一人でうろうろしている人をなんか野良って言うんです。
なるほど。元気ですか？
はい。韓国です。
なるほど。韓国人ですか？
はい。
ギターは弾いてどのくらいですか？
ギターは弾いて2年ぐらいかな。もともとベーシストなんですよ。ベーシスト。
なるほど。
ギターは趣味。
なるほど。バンドで
そう
ベースが。
そう。
海便です。私に3つのおすすめのアニメを教えてください。
おすすめのアニメですか。個人的におすすめするアニメは、一つはブラックジャックですね。
Also, if you're going to watch Blackjack, which I really recommend you do, start with the 2004 series or the 93 OVA.
2つ目はビースターズかな。ビースターズ結構好きですね。で、3つ目となると、ちょっと古いアニメなんですけど、プラネチスっていうアニメがおすすめです。
さあ、それあと一番好きなゲームは何ですか？ Okay, I do not recommend speaking like this because I'm pretty sure this question just came out really rude.
一番好きなゲーム、KSP。
なるほど。スペースゲームですね。
宇宙サンドボックスかな。ロケットとか作って遊べるゲームです。
カラオケが好きですか？
声が出ねえな。どうも、
こんばんは。
カラオケが好きっていうよりは歌が好きかな。
なるほど。私は鼻歌が好きです。歌のはちょっと苦手ですから、鼻歌の方がいいです。
言葉を言うわけじゃないからね。
そう。まあ、とりあえずこの部屋に戻ってきました。これまでの日本語の話すの経験についてちょっと話したいと思います。これまでの一番辛いことは構文ですよ。なんか言いたいことは全部伝えますけど、それに時間がかかる。そして簡単な活用とか T 形とか時々忘れちゃうよ。そのようなことを全部組むと、私の今の日本語はまだ実はダメですよ。たまにね、何か言いたいことがあるんですけど、 例えば会話の中で返事したいとか、それに10秒以上時間がかかる。実はそれはたまにじゃない。それはよくあることです。つまり私の今の日本語はいつも言葉と忘れと文法の過ちばかりです。けどそれは多分日本語の話すの経験があんまりないんですから。多分ね、ほんのちょっぴりの話す練習だけで超スピードで上達しますかもしれない。まあこれで今回の動画の VR チャットの終わりです。Man, I gotta admit, I do not like hearing myself speak Japanese. Alright, so that's what my Japanese currently sounds like, and as I said in the video, while I can convey my thoughts and will be understood by natives most of the time, my speaking is kind of really clumsy right now, and I assume the main reason for why is because I haven't trained my brain to recall information and to construct sentences on the fly yet. And the biggest obstacle right now seems to be that sometimes when I'm trying to say something, I might not be able to recall some word or figure out how to say it correctly, and if that takes too long, my mind often goes completely blank, which is pretty hard to recover from. But if you consider the fact that I genuinely have less than 15 hours of output practice throughout my entire Japanese career, it's actually not that bad because I assume that if I practice speaking for around 100 hours, it would already make a massive difference. So essentially, it goes to show that you do not need separate output practice in order to be able to output. But if you output for the first time, you're essentially going to be really rusty in the sense that you can communicate, but it's going to be really clumsy. However, because you've done so much immersion, you just kind of need to glue everything together with just a little bit of output practice, which should already make a massive difference in your speaking ability. I'd also like to mention that I still think I have very much to learn from getting more input. Like I mentioned multiple times throughout the video, I just haven't stacked up enough hours yet. For example, I'm pretty sure I had way more English immersion in the first 3 years compared to Japanese, and I definitely wasn't perfect in English by that time either. And besides that, I feel like I just recently reached the level where immersion is starting to become more accessible, comfortable, and enjoyable, which means that I can immerse more and get more value out of it. But at the same time, I still feel like I have a lot of content which is currently locked for me, as it's a level or two above my ability. So you might be wondering, what exactly am I going to do moving forward? Well, for the time being, I'll just keep on sentence mining until I hit about 10,000 words, after which I will see whether or not I'll continue, take a break, or stop adding new cards completely. And while I could start working on improving my output right away, I'm not really in a hurry to output, so I don't think it's as valuable to work on it now compared to later down the road, which will save me a lot of time. But I do look forward to the day when I can return to this video and notice a clear improvement in my speaking ability. So until then, I'll just keep on learning and hopefully enjoying the process. So anyway, man, this was one long video, and before I end it, I just wanted to give a huge thanks to everyone who has been following the channel, and especially to the supporters, for example on my Patreon. And speaking of Patreon, I also wanted to announce that because my Patreon didn't really have any rewards other than Discord roles, I decided that I'll share my own personal sentence deck as a Patreon reward. But ironically, I don't really recommend using it for multiple reasons. For example, because this deck is entirely personalized to myself, it might not be as effective for you, and it probably contains words that you personally might not want to waste your time learning. And of course, you also won't really know any of the context where the sentences came from, and it also might contain some spoilers and issues such as occasionally having Discord notification sounds in the audio and so on. So it's really just meant as an extra reference that you can explore for those of you who are curious and want to support the channel. I mean, you can use it for learning as well, but I guess that's up to you. So that's it for this very long update video, which definitely won't be the last. So hopefully it was useful, and hopefully I'll see you again in another video. So